A flight from Taiwan making its way to Canada had just touched down at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport for a layover. Passengers filed out, stretching their legs, checking their phones as usual. But in that crowd was one man who wasn't like the others. Traveling under the fake passport name Zhang Wei, he walked calmly, blending in, just like any other traveler making his way through a busy terminal. What he didn't know was that police and intelligence agencies from 3 different countries were already there, watching. He walked through the crowd like any other normal passenger, cleared customs, and calmly made his way toward the next gate for his connecting flight. As he reached for his boarding pass to catch his next connection, they moved in. No chaos, no gunfire, no shouting, just precision. They had finally caught the man they have been trying to catch for decades. This was the man behind one of the largest drug empires the world had ever seen. The man who turned the jungles of Southeast Asia into meth factories, ran secret labs, and shipped it via boats, containers, and even underground tunnels, flooding the markets across Asia, Australia, US, Europe, and beyond. The man who, at the peak of his empire, made an estimated $8 to $17 billion each year. This is the story of Tse Chi Lop, the El Chapo of Asia. Tse Chi Lop was born in 1963 in Guangdong, China, a region known for its bustling cities and rich cultural history. Growing up, he wasn't much different from any other kid in the neighborhood. His family wasn't wealthy, and they certainly weren't part of the elite. But they weren't struggling either. They were just ordinary. Tse's father worked hard, his mother did the best she could to keep the family together, and life seemed pretty typical for a young boy in China. In his teenage years, Tse's family made the decision to move to Canada, seeking for a better life. This was where things started to shift. Tse, now in his late teens, found himself in a new environment, a place where he had the chance to start fresh. He worked a few odd jobs to get by, nothing too glamorous. A few years as a dishwasher, some time spent working in a restaurant. It was simple, but life in Canada was certainly different from what he knew back in China. But while Tse was settling in, he was also becoming more aware of the opportunities around him. And in a place like Vancouver, there were plenty of opportunities that didn't always follow the straight and narrow path. Tse met the wrong kind of people. At first, it was small-time criminals, people who dealt in petty scams, small amounts of drugs, and other low-level offenses. But soon enough, he was introduced to something much bigger. Tse got involved with the Triads, a powerful criminal organization based in Hong Kong, with a significant presence in Vancouver. The Triads were known for their involvement in everything from drugs and extortion to human trafficking and money laundering. Tse quickly realized that this was where the real power was, and he saw an opportunity to make a name for himself. It didn't take long for Tse to join them, but he wasn't just a pawn in the game. Tse was smart, calculating, and had an almost unnatural ability to learn quickly. The Triads gave him his first taste of the criminal world on a grand scale. In his early days with them, Tse started out small by helping in the distribution of heroin and other drugs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable. But Tse wasn't satisfied with being just another drug runner. He knew he could do more. His ambition began to grow, and he saw how the Triads were running things, how they controlled a vast network of operations that stretched across Asia, North America, and even parts of Europe. He wanted to build something similar but even bigger, and most importantly, something that would be controlled by him, and soon enough, Tse would do just that. By the time Tse was in his mid-20s, he had seen enough of the Triads' operation to know how it all worked. He knew that drug trafficking was a big business, and he could easily get everything he had ever wanted by being in that business. But for that, he had to leave the Triad. So, in the late 1980s, Tse began to distance himself from the Triads. He wasn't out yet, but he was thinking of a way to establish his own empire. The more he learned, the more confident he became that he could do this better and on a much larger scale. And finally, by the 1990s, Tse finally left the Triad to build an empire of his own, which would soon become one of the biggest drug empires in this world. After walking away from the Triads in the early 90s, Tse wanted to create something massive. But for that, he needed 3 things: product, people, and protection. And he had plans for all 3. At the time, Southeast Asia, especially the Golden Triangle, which sits between Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar, was already famous for drug production. For decades, the region had been known for its heroin trade, but a new opportunity was rising fast. Synthetic drugs, drugs like meth and ecstasy, they were cheaper to make, didn't need poppy fields, and the demand was exploding, especially in wealthy nations like Australia, Japan, and South Korea. Tse had chosen the drug he wanted to sell. Now, all that remained was to build an empire capable of distributing it to the entire world. So he started traveling, quietly, staying under the radar, making connections across Asia. He wasn't just looking for gangsters, but for partners, people with experience, power, and control over territory. By the early 2000s, Tse had formed a drug group that would later become known as Sam Gore, a Cantonese term meaning brother number 3. But to law enforcement and international agencies, this massive drug syndicate was simply referred to as the Company. Once the alliance was formed, things moved fast. Each group brought something valuable: roots, protection, and local influence. They began setting up operations across Southeast Asia, using existing smuggling paths and bribed officials to stay hidden. Labs were built in remote areas, and the drug pipeline started to take shape. In just a few years, Sam Gore had turned into a well-organized and powerful criminal network. Sam Gore was producing staggering amounts of meth in hidden jungle labs throughout Myanmar, protected by armed militias and corrupt officials. These labs could cook thousands of kilos of meth at a time, often in remote areas where even local governments had little control. From there, the drugs were smuggled through a network of ports, airports, and land routes that stretched from China to Australia, Japan, and even Canada. Tse's syndicate didn't just rely on traditional smuggling. They were smart. They used shipping containers, hidden compartments in cars, commercial flights, and even human mules. People paid to carry drugs in luggage or inside their bodies. By the mid-2010, Tse was sitting at the top of a billion-dollar operation. According to some estimates, Sam Gore was making anywhere between $8 to $17 billion a year, mostly from meth. But as they say, nothing is invincible. And so was Tse's syndicate. As law enforcement started catching wind of how big this operation really was, Tse's name started to appear on radars. Australia, in particular, had been flooded with meth, and their federal police were losing the battle on the streets. Every time they busted a shipment or arrested a smuggler, a bigger shipment would take its place. And no matter how many people they caught, the man behind it all remained a ghost. In 2015, Australian authorities were beginning to notice a disturbing trend. Huge shipments of methamphetamine were being intercepted at ports, airports, and in quiet suburban warehouses. The volumes weren't small time. These were multi-ton seizures, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And it wasn't just Australia. Japan, New Zealand, Indonesia, Malaysia, they were all seeing the same thing. No matter where the shipments were caught, the drugs were almost identical. The packaging was the same. The chemical makeup was the same. Even the methods of concealment were nearly identical. Something, or someone, was clearly coordinating all of it. It all started in Myanmar, specifically the remote and lawless territories controlled by armed militias and warlords. Deep inside these jungle regions were industrial-scale drug labs, the size and scale of which stunned even veteran agents. These weren't scrappy jungle huts. These were factories, churning out thousands of kilos of meth every single week, practically untouchable by any government. Once cooked and packed, the drugs were smuggled out of Myanmar, often through Laos and Thailand, countries with weak borders and plenty of corruption to grease the way. From there, they were loaded into trucks and containers disguised as legitimate goods. The meth was hidden in everything: green tea packets, floor tiles, protein powders, printer cartridges, even vacuum-sealed meat packaging. Anything that could be sealed, masked, and moved. And then came the real genius of the operation: the global shipping routes. Investigators found that the drugs were being transported through a vast maze of cargo vessels, commercial shipping companies, and even tiny fishing boats that cruised through Southeast Asian waters unnoticed. From there, the meth would end up in ports all across the world: Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States, and even parts of Europe. Authorities also discovered that he had fake registered companies in Hong Kong and Thailand, warehouses in Vietnam, shell shipping firms registered in Laos, and legal import-export businesses used as a smokescreen. They had the entire operation laid out in front of them: every route, every shipment, every shell company. All that was missing was the name behind it all. And soon enough, that final piece of the puzzle was found. After years of tracking and findings, they confirmed that Tse Chi Lop was the mastermind behind it all. With his identity now clear, the hunt was on, and the operation he'd spent years building was about to come crashing down. On January 22, 2021, Tse was flying from Taiwan, making his way to Canada, a country that had become a new haven for his criminal operations. He'd managed to keep a low profile, constantly moving between countries using fake identities. But this time, it would be different. The international law enforcement agencies, particularly the Australian Federal Police, AFP, and International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol, had been closing in. Years of tracking shipments, flipping lower-level operatives, and analyzing intelligence reports had finally led them to Tse's movements. They knew he was scheduled to pass through Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, a major international hub. And this time, law enforcement would be ready. As his plane touched down at Schiphol, it was all set in motion. The Dutch police were waiting, but they had to be cautious. Tse was notorious for not traveling alone. He was often accompanied by bodyguards, enforcers, or intermediaries, and the situation could escalate quickly. Authorities didn't want a scene, not here. Not in one of Europe's busiest airports. The plan was to move in swiftly, calmly, and silently. Tse had gone unnoticed for years, disappearing into crowds, slipping through borders, and using multiple aliases. But not this time. He walked confidently through the terminal, completely unaware that he was being watched from every angle. The Dutch police let him walk just far enough, past customs, into a less crowded area, before stepping in. As he reached for his next boarding pass, they surrounded him. There was a brief moment of silence, almost like the world had slowed down. No shouting, no running, no resistance, just a quiet conversation. Officers confirmed his identity, then placed him under arrest. The man who had eluded capture for years, who had led a drug empire spanning continents, didn't say much. He didn't have to. It was over, and he knew that. The man who had built a multi-billion-dollar drug empire, the man whose name had been whispered in the back rooms of law enforcement agencies for years, was finally under arrest. After his arrest, Tse Chi Lop was extradited to Australia in December 2022, where he now awaits trial. He's currently held in a high-security prison, facing multiple drug trafficking charges linked to some of the largest narcotics operations in the Asia-Pacific region. If convicted, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars. But even with Tse gone, Sam Gore hasn't vanished. Like any well-structured organization, it wasn't built around just one man. The network he helped create, with its supply chains, producers, traffickers, and distributors, still exists. While some operations have slowed and others disrupted, Sam Gore continues to function in parts of Southeast Asia and beyond, adapting and surviving just like it always has. Law enforcement agencies are still working to dismantle what remains, targeting labs, intercepting shipments, and hunting down key figures within the group. But the truth is, with Tse Chi Lop behind bars, the hunt was finally over. That's all for this video. And if you enjoyed the content, then please consider subscribing and click on this video to watch another one.